The massive lecture hall buzzed with quiet conversation as students filed in for another session of advanced predator studies. The room itself was a marvel of galactic engineering, with seats that could just accommodate everything from the crystalline Zephyrians who needed precisely angled surfaces to the gaseous nebulans who required containment fields instead of traditional chairs. Professor Krell stood at the front, his towering insectoid frame casting long shadows across the polished floor. His 4 amber eyes swept across the room, cataloging each student with the methodical precision his species was known for. 2 of his 6 arms worked the holographic controls, while another pair held data tablets, and his remaining limbs gestured expressively as he spoke. "Welcome back, everyone." Krell's voice came through the universal translator, converting his natural clicks and chirps into smooth galactic standard. "Today we continue our exploration of the universe's most dangerous creatures." The holographic display in the center of the room suddenly blazed to life, showing a creature that made several students instinctively lean back in their seats. The Dryon cave stalker was a nightmare of evolution, stretching nearly 40 feet in length. Its serpentine body was covered in what looked like living crystal spikes, each one gleaming with a sickly green light that indicated the presence of corrosive chemicals. "This magnificent predator," Krell continued, his tone carrying the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loved the subject, "represents millions of years of evolutionary perfection. The acid it produces can eat through solid granite in minutes. Its crystalline armor can deflect energy weapons, and its hunting instincts are so refined that it can track prey through solid rock using microscopic vibrations." A student near the front, a being that looked like a walking tree with golden bark, raised one of its branch-like appendages. "Professor, how does something that large hunt in confined spaces?" "Excellent question, Orin," Krell replied, manipulating the hologram to show a cross-section of underground tunnels. "The Dryon doesn't just hunt in caves, it creates them. Watch the simulation." The display showed the creature secreting its acid in precise patterns, dissolving pathways through solid stone as it pursued its prey. The acid worked so efficiently that the tunnels it created were perfectly smooth, like glass tubes carved through the planet's crust. Several students made appreciative noises, the kind of sounds academics make when witnessing something particularly clever. In the back row, James Mitchell watched silently, occasionally making notes on his datapad. Unlike his classmates, who displayed their emotions through color changes, pheromone releases, or dramatic shifts in their energy fields, the human remained remarkably still. James had been attending these lectures for 6 weeks now, part of an unprecedented exchange program between Earth and the Galactic Education Consortium. He was the first human most of these students had ever seen in person, though few paid him much attention. Compared to his exotic classmates, he appeared almost boring, just a standard bipedal mammal with unremarkable brown hair and ordinary clothing. "Now," Professor Krell continued, shifting to a new image, "let's examine the classification system that helps us understand these magnificent creatures." The hologram changed to show a chart with different planetary categories, each represented by increasingly ominous symbols. Category: 1 worlds were marked with a gentle green glow, indicating garden worlds where life was comfortable and predators were minimal. The numbers climbed through increasingly dangerous classifications, with Category: 8 worlds showing amber warnings, and Category: 10 worlds glowing angry red. Category: 12 worlds, Krell explained, pointing to highest classification on the chart, represent the absolute limit of hostile environments that can still support complex life. The creatures from these worlds would be considered mythical monsters on safer planets. A student with translucent blue skin and what appeared to be gills along her neck raised a webbed hand. "Professor Krell, I've heard whispers in the academic networks about Category 13 worlds. Is there any truth to those rumors?" The question seemed to amuse Krell, his antennae twitching in what those familiar with his species would recognize as laughter. "Pure speculation, Nala. The physics of planetary development simply don't allow for conditions more extreme than Category 12 while still supporting biological life. Any world that hostile would either sterilize itself or never develop complex organisms in the first place." "But theoretically," pressed another student, a reptilian being with scales that shifted color as he spoke, "what would a Category 13 world even look like?" Krell's four eyes seemed to sparkle with academic delight at the hypothetical question. Well, Voss, such a world would need to produce predators so advanced, so perfectly adapted to violence and survival, that they would dominate not just their immediate environment, but their entire planet. We're talking about creatures that could outcompete every other form of life, reshape entire ecosystems to their will, and somehow do all of this while developing intelligence sophisticated enough for tool use and social cooperation. The professor paused, letting his students imagine such an impossible scenario. Of course, he added with what sounded like certainty, no such world exists. The evolutionary pressures required would be so extreme that any species reaching that level would likely destroy itself long before achieving true dominance. In the back row, James Mitchell made a quiet note on his datapad and continued listening, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The following week brought a change in the lecture hall's atmosphere. Professor Krell had spent the previous days preparing what he considered one of his most impressive presentations. The holographic projectors hummed to life, casting a blue glow across the faces of the assembled students as they settled into their various seats and containment fields. Today we dive into the realm of aquatic predators, Krell announced, his translator giving his words a dramatic flair that matched his enthusiastic gestures. Specifically, we'll examine what many consider the ultimate expression of predatory evolution. The hologram materialized in the center of the room, and several students gasped audibly. The creature that appeared was massive, easily 20 feet long, with a torpedo-shaped body that spoke of pure efficiency. Its skin was a mottled gray that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal, and its mouth hung open to reveal rows upon rows of triangular teeth, each one razor-sharp and perfectly designed for tearing flesh. "Behold the great white shark of Sol 3, Krell said, his voice carrying reverence. This apex predator has remained virtually unchanged for over 400 million years. When other species were still figuring out how to leave the primordial oceans, this creature had already achieved perfection." The hologram rotated slowly, allowing the students to observe every detail. Krell used a laser pointer to highlight specific features, his multiple arms working in coordination to operate both the display controls and his teaching aids. "Note the hydrodynamic design," he continued. "Every curve, every fin placement, every aspect of this creature's anatomy serves a single purpose: efficient killing. Its skeleton is made of cartilage rather than bone, making it lighter and more flexible. Its skin is covered in tiny scales called denticles that reduce drag and increase speed." A student who resembled a large jellyfish pulsed with bioluminescent interest. "Professor, what kind of speeds can it achieve?" "Up to 35 miles per hour in short bursts," Krell replied. "But speed is only part of the equation. This predator possesses sensory capabilities that border on the supernatural. It can detect electrical fields generated by the heartbeats of other creatures from vast distances." The students murmured appreciatively, various forms of alien anatomy expressing fascination through color changes, chemical releases, and electromagnetic fluctuations. In the back row, James Mitchell continued taking notes, but Krell noticed a human seemed less impressed than his classmates. "The great white's hunting strategy is brutally simple," the professor continued. "It approaches from below, using the darkness of the depths for camouflage, then strikes with tremendous force. A single bite can deliver up to 4,000 pounds of pressure per square inch." Krell manipulated the hologram to show a hunting sequence, the shark rising from the depths toward an unsuspecting seal. The attack was swift and decisive, over in seconds. "This creature dominated Earth's ocean for millions of years," Krell stated with finality. "It represents the absolute peak of aquatic predatory evolution. No creature on Sol 3 could challenge its supremacy in the marine environment." That's when James slowly raised his hand. The movement was casual, almost lazy, but it caught Krell's attention immediately. The professor had noticed that the human student rarely participated in discussions, preferring to observe and take notes. This was unusual behavior in an academic setting, where most species were eager to demonstrate their knowledge. "Yes, Mr. Mitchell?" Krell asked, his translator conveying a note of curiosity. James straightened slightly in his seat, but his posture remained relaxed. "Actually, Professor, great whites aren't really Earth's apex predator anymore." The statement hung in the air like a challenge. Krell's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of surprise in his species. Around the room, various students turned their attention toward the human, their alien features expressing confusion and interest. I mean, they're incredibly impressive creatures, James continued, his voice carrying the same polite tone he'd used throughout the semester. Everything you said about them is absolutely correct. They're perfect hunters, beautifully adapted, and they've been successful for an incredibly long time. Krell's antennae twitched slightly. Then what exactly are you correcting, Mr. Mitchell? Well, James said, leaning back in his chair with casual confidence, humans have been the dominant species on Earth for quite a while now, including in the oceans. The lecture hall fell into an uncomfortable silence. Professor Krell's translator made small buzzing sounds as it processed the human's words, seemingly struggling with the implications. Mr. Mitchell, Krell said slowly, his academic training warring with disbelief, surely you understand that dominance requires physical superiority. Humans lack natural weapons, armor plating, enhanced speed, or any of the traditional markers of predatory supremacy. The data clearly indicates that great whites possess every advantage in their environment. James nodded thoughtfully, as if considering Professor's words carefully. Oh, I'm definitely not disagreeing with your data about great whites. They really are amazing hunters, probably some of the most efficient predators that ever evolved. He paused, and several students leaned forward slightly, sensing that something important was coming. It's just that humans hunt great whites, James said matter-of-factly. For sport, mostly. Some people do it for food, but a lot of humans just catch them for the challenge and then let them go. The silence that followed was deafening. Nala's translucent skin shifted through several colors before settling on a pale yellow that indicated confusion and concern in her species. Vasa's scales had gone completely gray, while the jellyfish-like student had stopped pulsing entirely. Professor Krell stared at the human for a long moment, his translator producing small clicking sounds as he processed this information. We'll discuss this after class, Krell finally managed, his voice noticeably less confident than it had been moments before. James simply nodded and returned to his note-taking, that same small smile playing at his lips as the professor struggled to return to his prepared lecture. The third week arrived with Professor Krell, feeling notably less confident than usual. He'd spent considerable time reviewing his notes from the previous lecture, trying to understand James Mitchell's casual claim about humans hunting great whites. The academic databases showed humans as a relatively new species with no significant predatory adaptations, yet something about the human student's quiet certainty had unsettled him. Students filtered into the lecture hall as always, but Krell noticed several of them glancing toward the back row where James sat. Word had apparently spread about the human's unexpected comment, and curiosity was building among the diverse group of aliens. Today we examine environmental adaptations, Krell announced, trying to project his usual authority. We'll explore how life forms develop extraordinary survival mechanisms when faced with hostile planetary conditions. The holographic display activated, showing a creature that looked like living crystal formed into the rough shape of a serpent. It glowed with inner fire, its crystalline structure refracting light into beautiful but deadly patterns. This is a thermal WRM of Kepler, 442b, Krell explained, his voice gaining strength as he returned to familiar academic territory. This remarkable organism has developed internal chemical reactions that allow it to generate temperatures exceeding 400 degrees standard measurement. Several students leaned forward with interest. The concept of biological heat generation fascinated many species, particularly those from cooler worlds who struggle with temperature regulation. The planet Kepler, 442b, experiences extreme temperature fluctuations, Krell continued, manipulating a hologram to show the WIRM's internal structure. Surface temperatures can drop to nearly absolute zero during the long winter cycles, then soar to lethal levels during summer. Most organic life will be flash frozen or instantly vaporized by these conditions. A student who resembled a walking flower with petals that shifted color raised one of her appendages. Professor, how does the creature maintain its chemical reactions in such extreme cold? Excellent question, Lily, Krell replied, clearly pleased to be back in his element. The WIRM has developed specialized organs that function like biological furnaces. They can burn almost any organic material for fuel, maintaining their internal temperature regardless of external conditions. The display showed cross-sections of the creature's anatomy, highlighting the remarkable adaptation that allowed it to survive where other life forms would perish instantly. The students made appreciative sounds, their various forms of expression, creating a symphony of academic admiration. No unprotected organic life could withstand such temperature extremes, Krell stated with confidence. Environmental suits and artificial climate control are absolute necessities for any species attempting to explore such worlds. That's when James cleared his throat softly. The sound was barely audible, but it seemed to carry unusual weight in the lecture hall. Krell felt his confidence falter slightly as he recognized the same polite tone that had preceded the human's previous correction. "Professor?" James said, raising his hand with the same casual manner as before. Humans actually live pretty comfortably in temperature ranges from about -40 to +50 degrees Celsius. Some of us even choose to go to places like Death Valley or Antarctica for vacation. The statement hit the room like a physical force. Several students' expressions shifted to what could only be described as alarm. Krell's 4 eyes blinked rapidly as he processed the implications. "Surely you mean with environmental suits and protective equipment," Krell said, his translator carrying a note of hope that this was simply a misunderstanding. James shook his head slightly, that same small smile appearing. "Sometimes we use equipment. Sure, but humans adapt pretty well on their own. We sweat to cool ourselves down when it's hot, and shiver to generate heat when it's cold. Built-in temperature control system." Voss, the reptilian student whose scales have been gray ever since the previous week's revelation, spoke up with obvious concern. "But what about chemically hostile environments? Surely no organic species can survive in toxic conditions without artificial protection." James rubbed the back of his neck thoughtfully, as if considering how to explain something simple to people who might not understand. "Well, humans regularly consume ethanol, which I believe is toxic to most galactic species. We drink it socially, usually in the evenings or at celebrations." The silence in the room was profound. Even the various ambient sounds that different alien species made while breathing or maintaining their life functions seemed to quiet. "Caffeine, too," James continued conversationally. "That's actually a natural pesticide that plants evolved to kill insects, but humans use it to wake up in the morning. Most of us drink it daily. And then there's capsaicin." "What's capsaicin?" Nala asked, her translucent skin now showing a pattern of worried blue streaks. "It's a chemical that plants develop specifically to stop mammals from eating them," James explained. "It binds to pain receptors and creates an intense burning sensation. But humans cultivate plants that produce capsaicin specifically, so we can add it to our food to make eating more painful." The silence stretched so long that the room's environmental systems became audible, a soft humming that seemed unnaturally loud in the absence of conversation. "We call it spicy food," James added helpfully, apparently unaware that his classmates were staring at it with expressions of growing horror. Professor Krell stood frozen at the front of the room, his prepared lecture forgotten as he tried to process the idea of a species that voluntarily consumed toxins for entertainment. The 4th week's lecture began normally enough, with Professor Krell attempting to discuss evolutionary defense mechanisms. But within minutes, it became clear that his carefully prepared presentation would be completely abandoned. The students had clearly been talking among themselves since the previous week, and their curiosity about the human in their midst had reached a boiling point. Krell had barely finished introducing the topic when Nala raised her webbed hand, her translucent skin showing patterns of nervous energy. "Professor, could we perhaps hear more about human hunting methods?" The question hung in the air, and Professor Krell found himself nodding despite his better judgment. He'd spent the entire week researching human behavioral patterns in the galactic databases, and what he'd found had left him deeply unsettled. All eyes turned to James, who looked up from his data pad with mild surprise, as if he hadn't expected to become the center of attention. He set down his stylus and leaned back in his chair, apparently comfortable with the sudden focus. "How do humans hunt?" Nala asked directly, her skin shifting to colors that indicated intense curiosity mixed with apprehension. James considered the question for a moment, tilting his head slightly. "Well, Traditionally, we mostly just chase things until they collapse from exhaustion, he said in the same matter-of-fact tone he used for everything else. Humans are built for endurance running. We can maintain a steady pace for hours, sometimes even days if we need to. He gestured casually with one hand. Most prey animals are much faster than humans over short distances. A deer can outrun a human easily. But here's the thing. They can't maintain that speed. They sprint, then they have to rest. So humans just follow them at a steady pace, never stopping, never giving up. The room had gone completely silent except for the soft humming of the environmental systems. Even the students who normally made unconscious sounds while breathing seemed to have stopped. We just keep following, James continued, seemingly unaware of the growing horror on his classmates' faces. The animal runs, gets tired, stops to rest. We catch up. It runs again, gets more tired, needs a longer rest. We catch up again. Eventually, the animal becomes so exhausted it can't run anymore, and then we take it down. Voss, the reptilian student, made a sound that his translator rendered as something between a whimper and a hiss. That's horrifying. James looked genuinely puzzled by the reaction. It's called persistence hunting. It's very effective, actually, though these days most humans don't need to hunt for food anymore. We mostly use tools now. What kind of tools? Nala asked, though her skin had shifted to a deep purple that indicated fear among her species. Oh, James said with a slight shrug. Sharp things, fast projectiles, controlled explosions. We got pretty creative over the years. He paused, as if thinking of examples. Spears, bows, and arrows, firearms that shoot metal projectiles faster than sound. We figured out how to make explosives, then put them in containers and throw them at things. Eventually, we got really advanced and learned how to split atoms for energy. Professor Krell's translator made a strangled sound that might have been disbelief. Mr. Mitchell, you're describing technological capabilities that require millions of years of peaceful development. No species develops nuclear technology while maintaining predatory instincts. James rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Actually, we figured out atomic weapons first, then peaceful nuclear power later. And we did it all while still hunting and fighting each other. Humans do weird things sometimes. The lecture hall felt like it had been plunged into a nightmare. Several students were making distress sounds, their various forms of alien biology expressing fear and confusion through color changes, chemical releases, and electromagnetic fluctuations. We also kept some of the apex predators from our world as pets. James continued conversationally. Wolves were some of the most successful pack hunters on Earth, so naturally humans decided to make friends with them and turn them into companions. You domesticated pack hunters? Voss managed to ask, his scales now a pale gray that indicated shock. We call them dogs now, James said with what might have been fondness. They're great with human children, very protective. Some breeds are bred specifically to be gentle with babies, while others are trained to attack intruders on command. A student who resembled a large crystalline spider made clicking sounds that translated as panic. Why would you keep predators near your young? Well, they protect our children from other predators, James explained patiently. Plus, humans seem to enjoy dangerous activities. We jump out of perfectly good aircraft for fun, climb vertical rock faces without safety equipment, and race vehicles at speeds that would be instantly fatal if something went wrong. Why? Several students asked simultaneously. James thought about it for a moment. We call them extreme sports. I think humans just get bored if life isn't challenging enough. The room erupted in various forms of alien distress calls. Professor Krell had gone completely silent, his four eyes staring at James with an expression that might have been horror or fascination. Here's the thing, James said, raising his voice slightly to be heard over the commotion. Earth isn't actually a category, 12 Deathworld like you guys have been teaching. The room fell silent again, waiting for his next words. It's much worse than that. James continued with that same casual tone. But humans didn't just adapt to it. We conquered it completely. Every other apex predator on the planet is either extinct because we drove them out, endangered because we took their territory, or learned to stay far away from human settlements. Professor Krell's carapace had turned a sickly gray color, and he seemed to be having trouble with his translator. "We reshaped entire continents to suit our needs," James added helpfully. The final week of the semester arrived with an atmosphere unlike anything the Galactic Xenobiology Institute had ever experienced. Word of the human students' revelations had spread throughout the academic community, sparking debates that reached all the way to the highest levels of galactic scientific institutions. Professor Krell had spent sleepless nights corresponding with colleagues across the galaxy, cross-referencing databases, and questioning everything he thought he knew about planetary classifications. As students filed into the lecture hall, they noticed immediately that something had changed. The usual holographic displays showing various alien predators were absent. Instead, a simple image dominated the center of the room, a basic bipedal figure that looked remarkably unremarkable. Professor Krell stood at his lectern, but his usual confident posture had been replaced by something that could only be described as respectful caution. His 4 amber eyes swept across the room, lingering for a moment on James Mitchell, who sat in his customary spot in the back row, data pad ready as always. "Class," Professor Krell began, his translator conveying a gravity that hadn't been present in previous lectures. "Today we discuss a fundamental revision to everything we thought we knew about apex predators and planetary classification systems." The silence in the room was absolute. Even species that normally made unconscious sounds while breathing seemed to be holding perfectly still. After extensive consultation with the Galactic Council's Xenobiology Department, the Planetary Classification Committee, and several independent research institutions, we have made an unprecedented decision, Krell continued. "We are establishing a new category in our classification system." The holographic display shifted, showing the familiar chart of planetary categories that the students had memorized over the semester. But now there was something new, a Category 13 designation that glowed with an ominous deep red that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. Sol 3, known to its inhabitants as Terra or Earth, has been reclassified, Professor Krell announced. It is not, as we previously believed, the Category 12 Deathworld. It is something far more extraordinary and terrifying, the first and only known Category 13 World. A student who resembled a crystalline tree with shifting prismatic bark raised one of her branches. "Professor, what defines a Category 13 World?" Professor Krell's antennae twitched as he considered how to explain the unprecedented classification. A Category 13 World is a planetary environment so hostile, so demanding, that it produces species capable of not merely surviving their ecosystem, but completely dominating and reshaping it according to their will. The display changed again, now showing Earth from space, a blue and green marble that looked deceptively peaceful floating in the cosmic void. "The apex predator Terra," Krell continued, his voice carrying a mix of academic fascination and genuine unease, "is designated Homo sapiens." The simple bipedal figure reappeared in the hologram, rotating slowly to show its unremarkable features. No claws, no fangs, no natural armor, no enhanced physical capabilities that would suggest predatory dominance. Yet this species achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. Professor Krell said, "They made their entire planet submit to them." Nala, her translucent skin showing swirls of confused colors, raised a webbed appendage. "Professor, how is this possible? They appear to have no natural advantages." Professor Krell's 4 eyes focused on James, who had looked up from his note-taking with polite attention, seemingly unbothered by being the subject of intense academic scrutiny. "The answer," Krell said slowly, "lies not in their physical capabilities, but in their cognitive approach to problem-solving. They think, they adapt, they never accept that a problem cannot be solved, no matter how impossible it appears." The hologram shifted to show images of human cities, vast agricultural complexes, and spacecraft launching toward the stars. "But perhaps most remarkably," Professor Krell continued, "they cooperate with each other on a scale that defies conventional understanding of social behavior. When faced with obstacles that would force other species to adapt to their environment, humans instead choose to adapt their environment to themselves." A reptilian student whose scales had been gray with worry for weeks finally voiced a question that had been haunting many of his classmates. "Professor, Are we in danger from humans? The question seemed to surprise James, who looked genuinely puzzled. From humans? No, of course not. We're generally pretty friendly once you get to know us. James glanced around the room at his classmates, many of whom were displaying various forms of nervous energy through their alien biology. Humans tend to be very protective of things we care about, and we usually care about pretty much everyone once we decide you're part of our group. And what determines whether someone becomes part of the group? Professor Krell asked, his academic curiosity overcoming his caution. James smiled, the same easy expression he'd worn throughout the semester. Pretty much just spending time together. Humans have this weird habit of adopting strays. We see something that needs help or protection, and we just take care of it. He gestured casually around the lecture hall. Besides, I'm learning a lot here. Earth's ecology is fascinating and all, but it's really nice to see how life developed on other worlds. Gives you perspective on just how amazing the universe really is. Professor Krell found himself updating his files with limbs that trembled slightly as he typed. The new curriculum he was designing would begin with a simple warning that he planned to print it on every syllabus. When studying apex predators, remember that the most dangerous ones often appear deceptively harmless. In the back of the room, James Mitchell continued taking notes, already looking forward to next semester's course on impossible evolutionary adaptations. He had a feeling he'd have plenty to contribute to that discussion as well.